Hi guys. Um, Welcome to today's class. So we're actually going to skip a bit because the audio manager requires it has some dependencies on the networking code section. They talk about how to build managers in Unity, which we haven't done yet. So we've talked about enough of the audio that you should be able to do most things for your game. You should be able to attach sounds to things and trigger sound effects, and so that should be pretty straightforward. We're going to skip now into GUIs, and we're going to go back to sound after we've talked about networking. So we're going to talk about GUIs, we'll talk about networking, and we'll go back and we'll talk about sound, the rest of the sound section. Should be fine because, like I said, I think you have enough to do all the sound effects in your game. We haven't talked about background music and crossfading. There's some other things that we'll cover later, but I think essentially you've got most of the tools that you need, and you do need to know how to do GUIs fairly soon because this is probably something that you're definitely going to have for your game. So we're going to talk about how to build GUIs in Unity, which is actually not too bad. So the basic outline of what we're going to talk about today, or not today, but over the series of videos on GUIs, is we're going to talk about planning the interface, placing the UI elements, programming interactions with UI elements, making the GUI responsive to events, and making the scene respond to GUI actions. So a term that you'll hear a lot in games is a HUD, the term HUD. And so a HUD is short for heads-up display, and basically what this is it's just a GUI that's projected on top of the 2D world. So you do the 2D world rendering, and then the GUI you sort of, so that's like taking a picture of the 2D world. That's what the rendering process is. It's basically like you take a picture of the 3D world, and then we're going to draw the 2D GUI on top of that photo. So most games have this, and they have lots of different things that you can do with the GUIs. You can interact with things. You can have weapon swaps, change your settings, resolutions, whatever. They'll also have status information like your health, your ammo, these sorts of things. So this is called a HUD, or heads-up display. It's a very common term in games. I'm sure you've heard it before if you're a gamer. So the first thing we have to do is we have to plan our GUI. And typically game GUIs are not horribly complicated because it's not something that you're going to want to use a lot of time in the game. Most of what you're going to be doing is controlling your character, or controlling whatever's going on in the game. You're not really going to be using the mouse to click things or to touch things. So mostly what these things are going to be used for is, like I said, informational displays like you see here. So we have a score with an image and text. We have a pop-up window that if you click the gear button, it's going to open up a pop-up window when it's clicked. Here's going to be the close button in a pop-up window. And we're going to have input controls, a text input for name, and a slider for speed. So this is our GUI plan, and we usually do this on paper somewhere so we can figure out what we want things to look like for our game. And remember, this is going to be overlaid on top of the game world, so you want to make sure that you design it so that you don't put GUI elements on top of what the player's really looking at. It needs to be sort of unobtrusive. So importing images for the GUI, it's extremely straightforward. It's exactly like we did last time. You just drag them into the project view, all the images you plan to use for the UI. In the inspector, though, so for 2D games, when you drag images in, they default to materials. And what you want to change these to, if it's a 2D game or if it's a UI, you're going to want to change it to, let me show you an example. So here we've got some graphics. You're going to want to go in here and you're going to want to change the type from default or whatever else it would be to normal, to sprite, 2D, and UI is what you're going to change this to. So here you see I've already imported some. This example project, I'm going to put this up for you. You can take a look at it. So that's pretty straightforward. You just drag them in and you change the types. Easy to go. Alright, so this is something that's a little odd. No, it's not odd actually. So UI elements are part of what's called a canvas object. So you create a canvas object, and that is actually what you lay out your UI elements on. So to create a new canvas object, very simple. You right click, create new canvas, and it'll make a new canvas for you. This is also going to create an event system object, which is going to be used for handling clicks and things on the GUI. But don't worry about that for now. We're going to talk about that later. So the canvas object is going to be enormous because it maps one pixel of the screen onto one pixel of the screen onto one unit of the scene. So it's really, really big. So to see your canvas after you've done this, what you're going to do, so if you look up here, I don't know if you've noticed this, but there's a 2D mode here. So right now, this is just the game that we started with earlier. So if we look at it, in fact, you can actually see our HUD here, right? So this is the game we were working on earlier. You can see the HUD in action. I'm going to pause this. So we want to go to 2D mode, and that is going to put us in like a 2D, a plane view of the mode, of the scene. But then what we're going to want to do, because we want to look at the HUD canvas itself, we're going to double click the HUD canvas. So now you see we've zoomed in on this object, and if you turn off 2D mode, you can see this is actually a 3D object, but it's just a plane. And it is actually enormous. Our game is here. You can see it down in a corner down there, and our game is down here, but this thing is enormous. I'm just going to switch to 2D mode. I'm going to zoom in a bit on the HUD so we can see. So this is our canvas, and this is what we're going to lay out our HUD elements on. And it's pretty straightforward. So there's some settings that we need to look at for the canvas. So there's a screen space, and then we can choose overlay, and that renders the UI as a 2D graphics on top of the camera view, which is exactly what we talked about earlier. This is the default. It's basically just, it renders a 3D scene, and it draws the 2D canvas on top of the 3D scene. There's also screen space camera. It's the same as overlay, but the UI elements can rotate for perspective effects. So you can actually rotate the elements. It's not, it treats it kind of like a camera view. It's the same thing, but there's a camera looking at the HUD display. Is the best way I can explain it. So the world space option is the final one, and this actually treats the UI as part of the 3D scene. All of these things have uses depending on how you're designing your game. So which one you want to choose? I would say right now for default, you can probably just go with the overlay. It's the easiest and the simplest, and you're not doing anything super fancy probably with your HUD. So just go with overlay for the moment. So the other thing that we just look at, there's another setting, it's pixel perfect. And what this does is adjust positions of the images so they line up with the screen pixels. So if we choose picture perfect, then if we choose pixel perfect, then the pixels on the screen and the pixels of the HUD. Otherwise, if you think about it, if you shift the image slightly and I don't have a pixel in the GUI element images that line up exactly with the screen pixel, then I have to interpolate in between because I don't know the value of that pixel exactly. I just have to interpolate between the two nearest pixels or the four nearest pixels, depending on what interpolation mode I'm using. And that is going to cause some fuzziness in our display. So if we check this pixel perfect, it's going to adjust our GUI images slightly so that the pixels of the image line up exactly on the pixels of the screen, and there's no interpolation, and it's super smooth. So that's all we're going to talk about today. I'm going to put another video up tomorrow, and we'll go on into how to lay out GUI elements and some of the other programming aspects. Thanks for watching, and have a good day.